Point of View Ministries.
Bible School Radio 91.3 KDKR Decatur, Dallas, Fort Worth, and 91.3 KYJC Commerce. Portions of KDKR's daily programming do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff.
Prudent Money with Bob Brooks is sponsored by the Prudent Money Foundation on 91.3.
Well, the truth about target date funds and what you need to know. Today we're going to take a look. Stay tuned for Prudent Money. Good afternoon and welcome to the Prudent Money Radio Show. I'm your host, Bob Brooks. Thank you so much for joining me today. You know I do appreciate it. Well, if you got a question for me, please go to the website at prudentmoney.com. Send a question into the Ask Bob section and I will get you taken care of. That's all at the website, www.prudentmoney.com. Yesterday we talked about employees suing their employers over their 401k plans. And I talked about at least my thoughts about that, how I didn't agree with that. But a couple of things came up in questions concerning that program. Number one, the problem that target date funds present. We're going to talk a little bit about that today because I would be willing to bet that there's at least a percentage of you that think that target date funds do one thing and maybe the truth is not so true with that. So we'll talk about that. And if you're an employer and you have a 401k plan, what liability you might be taking with a target date fund. And then finally, before we go on, I want to talk a little bit about the opposite situation. Could an employee sue a 401k plan or an employer, the plan fiduciaries, for not having a safe place to put money? These are all real sticky questions that I don't know that employers are really considering. Let's start with the target date funds. A target date fund, as you may or may not know, is on paper, I think it's a great concept on paper. The problem is it just doesn't work the way as good as it does on paper. But the concept is that if I'm going to retire in 2030, then I'm going to put my money into a 2030 target date fund. And what ends up happening is that particular target date fund, as you move closely year after year towards retirement, the concept is that you reduce your risk in the investments so that by the time you get there for retirement, you're in great shape risk-wise. Like I said, looks good on paper, doesn't work so well in reality. I'm not real sure, because I couldn't find this data, the amount of money that's invested in target date funds. And they're also called freedom funds and all kinds of other different names to them, but the concept's all the same. But it is a scary large amount. And what employers did to get past the liability that the 401k plans are creating for them, the target date funds were a good choice because it's a system, it reduces risk, and it gets you all the way to your retirement. It's and you know how I feel about this, there's no such a thing, but it's the fund, it's the investment you don't have to think about. Can barely even say it, because you got to be thinking about everything you're doing with money and with investments and all that. There's nothing that you can just put on autopilot, as the marketing would suggest for these target date funds. So I went and took a look because I felt like I would find what I found, and I looked at a target date fund that's 2020. Now, if you're in a target date fund of 2020, theoretically, you've been retired for 2 years. And if you've been retired for 2 years, then your funds are probably invested pretty conservatively not taking a lot of risk, because you can't afford to take a big hit because of you're consuming those investments, and you're depending on the growth. So I went and looked at how did target date funds, 2020 funds, how have they performed in a very difficult stock market in this year, 2022. And it's almost disturbing, but here's the range. And keep in mind something, that if you're managing a target date fund, a 2020 fund, let's just say a 2020 fund, between if you have three different companies who offer target date funds, or freedom funds, or lifestyle funds, there's many names for them, that 2020 number shouldn't be that much different between the three companies, because they're all working out of the same playbook. They're all trying to be conservative, take less risk, and protect their clients who are presumably in retirement by 2 years. Don't forget that. According to Morningstar, at the end of August, the spread, the best rate of return for the year was negative 8.95%. But the worst was 15.98%, almost 16% loss for someone who's 2 years into retirement in an 8-month period. That is absolutely unacceptable. And I got to tell you, I won't say the name of the company, but the mutual fund company is a huge mutual fund company that is just about everybody recognizes the name of it. Almost 16% through the end of August. And you got to think that the investors who put their money in this felt like that they were putting money into a real conservatively based investment. And not so true. 15.98%, but even 8.95% is ridiculous. And that just goes to show you that these funds, the concept in paper looks great, but the concept in reality is not so good. It doesn't work. Because even at negative 8.95% is very unacceptable for someone who's in retirement for 2 years. Now, I might differ in what they think that the amount of money that should go in stocks. I would think at that point that you would have a very small amount of money in stocks. They probably have a larger amount than I would. But the point is that it's not just about stocks and bonds and international funds, this cookie cutter diversification technique. It's about really taking this concept and making it fit in the environment that we are faced with today, which is rising interest rates and inflation. So they don't do that. It's somewhat of a flawed concept. And once again, so many people are flocking towards these, saying, well, if I just get the one, maybe I'm not going to retire in 2020, but I want to be conservative, so I put my money in 2020. Well, the one that lost the worst, and I don't want to just harp on the worst, because there's a range, a huge range, which surprised me. 15.98% is not too far off from where the stock market is, where you're taking out 100% of the risk of the market. Not a good situation. Now, if you are an employer and you have a 401k plan, and it doesn't matter to me whether you have 2 employees or you have 10,000 employees, you've got a fiduciary responsibility, a fiduciary responsibility to make sure that you are providing something that is in the best interest of your employees. And I don't know that this particular situation is a fiduciary issue. That would be for the courts to determine. But it is an issue that if your employees are interpreting one thing and they're getting another, and it's pretty easy to correct that by getting rid of the fund, then I don't know. It's an interesting dilemma, and this is why I don't like the courts determining the standards for these particular situations. I think that the employer should have an opportunity to get rid of the fund given a reasonable amount of time. And I think that this year exposes these target date funds to the point to where it says, maybe you should get rid of these funds. The other thought was, I can't tell you through the years how many times I've come across a 401k plan where there was nothing safe to put money into. So you have a scenario where the employee is putting money into the 401k plan. They don't want to take a lot of risk. There's tons of stock funds they can put their money into, but all those are taking stock market based risk. There's nothing for the employee to put something in that is safe or presumably safe. And does that create liability? We'll talk about that on after the break. We do have a break coming up. This is Bob Brooks. You got a question for me, please go to the website at www.prudentmoney.com. Send it in, and we'll get it answered for you. We are up against the break. Stick around. I'll be right back.
The Word for Today is excited to announce the new official online home for the ministry of Pastor Chuck Smith and Kay Smith, pastorchuck.org. At pastorchuck.org, you'll have instant access to thousands of hours of verse-by-verse teaching by Pastor Chuck Smith from Genesis through Revelation, and full access to special messages on subjects such as prophecy and much, much more. Also at pastorchuck.org, a full library of great teachings by Kay Smith, and a section where you can read some of Pastor Chuck's books online, all free of charge. So visit the new official online home of the Word for Today and the ministry of Pastor Chuck and Kay Smith, pastorchuck.org.
Followers of all religions have grappled with the problem of suffering. Suffering can test our faith and shake our trust in God. After all, if God exists, why is there such suffering in the world? Friday on The Verdict, we're exploring this difficult question as we continue our series, What Would You Ask God? Friday on The Verdict.
Listen 10:30 a.m. on Bible School Radio 91.3.
Dr. Charles Stanley.
What's the world seeking today? Pleasure, prosperity, you name it. If you want to be conformed to the likeness of Christ, if you want to be a godly person, you must seek those things that are godly. Set your mind, fix your thoughts on the things above, on Christ, not on the things of this world.
The teaching of Dr. Charles Stanley on In Touch, helping you grow in Christ every day.
Listen daily at 12:30 on Bible School Radio 91.3.
Welcome back. This is Bob Brooks, and you are listening to the Prudent Money Radio Show. Thank you so much for joining me today. You know I do appreciate it. If I can help you in any way, answer a question, hear your comments, you know where to go, prudentmoney.com. Or you can send me an email at info@prudentmoney.com or bob@prudentmoney.com. I keep it pretty easy. You can get information a lot of different ways. If in the past you have sent in an email, you didn't get a response, please let us know, because we are serious about answering those emails. That's off the website, prudentmoney.com. I was talking a little bit about a 401k plan that had no safe places in it to put money into it. I would suggest, if you're an employer and you don't have at least a money market, Now, most funds, most 401k plans have what's called a stable value fund. And make sure that you hear my disclaimer in the biggest of ways. Stable value funds, money market funds are designed to not lose money. That doesn't mean they can't lose money. I can probably build a scenario where that could happen, and the government, just like in 2008, had to bail out a money market so that investors didn't lose money. So I don't want you to get this false sense of security. It's just that it's the safest option in the group. And if you don't even have that, and I think it really comes down to, the stable value fund is, I don't know what percentage 401k plans is. It's a lot. But at least have a money market. And I would suggest, if you're an employer today, if I'm an employee and I have my money in your 401k plan, and I'm getting ultra concerned about the market, and I want to move my money to something safe, and there's no money market or no stable value fund or no short-term government securities fund or anything like that, does that create liability for you? If I end up taking a 25-30% loss, I would say that it does. So there's a lot for an employer today to look at and consider when it comes to 401k plans. I would suggest that there could come a time where you're going to see employers go, to heck with that. I'm not going to take this kind of liability. But really, at the end of the day, I think that there's 2 or 3 things employers can do to protect themselves from frivolous, and I think some of these are very frivolous lawsuits by employees that they're just not doing. They're just not getting good advice. That's what the 401k company is there to do, is to give them advice, and I don't think they're getting good advice. One other thing that jumped off the page at me when I was looking at these target date funds, I guess I've noticed this, but I've just never said anything about it. It didn't strike me, is that there are some of these target date funds outside of 401k plans, because advisors use them as well, that you have to pay a commission on. Now, as you know, mutual funds come in the no-load variety, where that's kind of your do-it-yourself. You put the money in, you select the fund, you don't pay commissions, or you don't pay any kind of commission going forward. Then there's the advisor-based funds that are loaded with a commission up front, or they have an ongoing commission. Well, it makes no sense to me to pay a commission for something that you can go to a no-load investment company, such as a Vanguard or a Fidelity, in which Fidelity has both commission and no commission, which I don't get that. And choose when you're going to retire and stick your money into it. Now, once again, I'm not advocating target date funds by any stretch, but that's just a thought that I wanted to put out there and make sure that you ask the question, well, what's the advisor getting paid for to do? And that's a personal question, and depends on the situation, but something that you might want to take a look at. Let's talk a little bit about Social Security. There's been a lot of questions regarding the cost of living adjustment for Social Security payments. It comes out in October of this year and will apply to 2023. And I've seen these numbers change a little bit, but you can get the idea of the range we're looking at. The lowest is supposed to be is a 9% increase in your Social Security payment. Ladies and gentlemen, that's a pretty nice little increase. Very nicely increased. Now, keep in mind that gets eaten up by inflation. You would have liked to have had that this year, but you did get a 5.9% increase this year for 2022. The maximum it could be is 11.5%. Like I said, I've seen different ranges, but this one's been the most consistent that I've seen. And they'll determine that in October and announce that in October. The average inflation rate, if you go back to the early 1900s, is 3.24% a year. I had a question come up, why wouldn't you use that in your planning as the average inflation rate when that's been it? The reason being is that a couple of reasons. The first one is that for most people, 40 to 50 to 60% of their retirement comes from Social Security. And Social Security has a cost of living adjustment attached to it. So probably not to the penny do they cover it, but they do stay somewhat close to the average as the government averages. Probably not the real number, but the thing about it is the real number of inflation is something that is, and I'll come back to this in a second, but I'll just kind of introduce it, is for a period of time that is it's a fairly short period of time, maybe 2 or 3 or 4 years, not 10, 15, 20, 25, 30 years. So it's just for a period of time that you've got to adjust to. But like I said, if the majority or half of your income is covered by Social Security, your cost of living adjustment by the government keeps that going in the right direction. I said on a program that I felt very comfortable with a 2% inflation rate to a 2.5% inflation rate, because some of it's covered by Social Security, and then some of you can build into your investment model. Some of it covered by Social Security by your investment model, and once again is 2 to 2.5%. So what if you are in retirement and you still come short because of your planning? Well, one of the things I've talked about often, many times, is that you're loosely forecasting numbers. Since we don't have a crystal ball, we don't know what the rates of return are going to be, we don't know what the inflation rate, you get it within a ballpark number, which I do feel very confident with 2 to 2.5% does that job. But this is why it's important to have cash in a good, solid emergency fund to cover those months that we're in higher inflationary periods that your income is just not covering. It's either that or it's adjusting your spending downwards a bit. So, but between the cost of living adjustments, between a stated inflation rate, and having cash, enough cash set aside, which you obviously, if you're in retirement and you don't, then you can. You have to manage some other a different way. But if you are 5, 10, 15, 20 years out, you can start building that cash account now. We'll go to take care of the rest of it. Hey, this is Bob Brooks, and you are listening to the Prudent Money Radio Show. Thanks so much for joining me today. I do appreciate it. Let's take a look ahead at what is coming up on Prudent Money. Tomorrow, Tony Joe's going to be here, as he is every Friday, for the special Car Corner edition of Prudent Money. This was Tony Joe started with Don Spear doing this Friday segment decades ago, and then when I picked up the program in 1992, was it 92? No, excuse me, not 1992. That couldn't have been. When 2002, there we go. And we started we kept it going because Tony Joe just has so much great information about spending money on an asset that we spend a lot of money on, which is our cars. We're going to be talking about catalytic converters and the spike in those getting stolen. We've talked about this before at one point this year, but I think it makes sense to go back and revisit because this is happening more and more often today. Then going into next week, we're going to be talking about, is the bear market almost over? And what that looks like, what history would have to say about it, what 2023 looks like, what the rest of 2022 looks like, and we'll do that on Monday. And then at some point next week, we'll be talking about, you're in your 401k plan, you're a couple of years away from retirement, tough situation, you've taken a big hit. What do you do? What steps do you take? And it's not an easy question to answer, but it's an important one to discuss and kind of break down. So we'll be talking about that as well, and covering everything with the news of the markets and keeping you posted on what you need to know. Listen, if you got a question for me, please go to the website at prudentmoney.com. Send it in. I do answer all my questions. I love to hear from you. That's off the website, www.prudentmoney.com. Well, we are all out of time. Until we do meet again next time, keep the faith and have a great rest of the day.
That's all the time we have for today. Questions or comments for Bob, or to find out more great information like what you've just heard, visit www.prudentmoney.com. Be sure to join Bob Brooks again for the next edition of Prudent Money.